Right, the campaigns. Overall, we will all have different views on this, but my reaction to the two campaigning organisations, I think, was one of disappointment. What I sensed at many of the meetings I attended, and John's referred to 5-minute questions, which was the university's portal for the independence debate, which saw 10,000 people through our doors. But what I was struck by those meetings, and indeed on television and radio, was that people didn't always get the answers to the questions they asked. And in part this was because many of the questions raised were unanswerable. Say on the economy. We don't know what's going to happen in the 12 months in terms of looking forward at the British economy. How could we possibly, with any conviction, say what the situation would be like in 5, 10 or 20 years? These were impossible questions to answer. The debate about North Sea oil was similarly problematic, and it could never be anything other than inconclusive, given that so much depends A, on the oil price, B, on global demand, and C, advances or otherwise in drilling technology. None of these things are knowable in advance. Well, so I think that many questions weren't answered, and that frustrated people, but in a sense that was inevitable because the questions were unanswerable. But I do think, or that's my view anyway, that the campaign was generally over-pragmatic and too narrowly focused, with neither side, it seemed to be, being prepared to grapple with what I think were big issues of culture and identity and what it means to be an independent state in a world that's dominated by coalitions of states, as in the EU, G7, G20, NATO, and so on and so forth. So, for example, we heard a lot on the yes side about the importance of Scotland having an independent voice in the EU, and that was a fair enough claim to make, or promise to give. But much less we heard about what influence that voice would have in the European Union, where the big power brokers are Germany and France, and to a lesser extent Britain and Spain. But I guess what I felt most disappointed about was the example set by the leading figures on both sides, actually. Too often a debate that was about the future of a nation became one about politicians' egos. There was too much talking, shouting in fact, and not enough listening. The eyes of the world, as I said, were honest, but I certainly hope they weren't honest on those evenings when Johann Lamont and Nicola Sturgeon crossed swords on STV, or indeed during the debates between Alex Salmond and Alistair Darling. Having said that, there were political leaders who I think did impress on both sides. On the yes side, Jim Sillars was honest and forceful, while on the other side, Ruth Davidson came of age, in my view. And indeed, there were a couple of, I better mention Labour, there were a couple of younger Labour MSPs who showed signs, I think, that they recognised that the older tribalism of former days or former years has had its day. And it was good to see Gordon Brown, I thought, shaking off his post-premiership depression to make some barnstorming speeches in favour of the Union, although I suspect with rather less influence on voting behaviour than either he or his backers might have hoped. But I don't know why they do it. And this thing, many people who know me well know that this is one of my issues. I don't know why political parties or both these campaigns insisted every so often on bringing out actors to bolster their cases. Clearly I am missing something, but I can't understand why we as voters should be persuaded to vote one way or another by people who spend their lives forgetting who they are, pretending to be somebody else, reading out lines by somebody else. Elaine C. Smith is a brilliant comic actor, but not someone I'd go for advice on Scotland's future. I respect her right to comment, but no more or less than the man or woman next door. I mean, I just don't get that thing. And I don't know, we can talk about whether or not that has any influence or not. I find it deeply irritating if you're patronising. Right, okay, the campaigns. Yes, Scotland. If you look at the outcome, you've got to agree or concede that yes, Scotland, or I think you can agree that Scotland, yes, Scotland failed in its big aim. But I think, as I've suggested, this would be very unfair, because to push the vote up from 30 to 45% was a major achievement. I was impressed by the positive tone of the yes gates, aspects of which were unanswerable, I thought. I mean, who wouldn't want greater prosperity and a fairer society? Who wouldn't be convinced by the argument that most Scots didn't get the government at Westminster that they voted for? Or indeed that Westminster, with its House of Lords and the expenses scandal and all of that, no longer deserves the respect that it once had amongst the general public. Who wouldn't agree that there are Scottish challenges and Scottish issues which would be best dealt with by a Scottish legislature? So that I think was positive about the Yes campaign. Yes, too, I think played very cleverly the Scottish card, that is by claiming that Westminster was ganging up on Scotland over the currency, for example, or over what would happen to pensions or supermarket prices or inward investment on the part of business. Very smart, too, I thought, was the notion of the scare story, of which there were clearly some, although I think this was, my view is that this was overdone. It's clear that some of what were depicted as scare stories were perfectly legitimate comments or contributions to the debate by people who are organisations that simply disagreed with the Yes campaign assertions. I suppose linked with this is the issue of bullying or alleged bullying. Is it bullying or bribery for a partner to say, if you're leaving me, you can't use the joint account? That seems to me to be a fact rather than a bribe or bullying, but there we can talk about that. Now, of course, I'm referring here to the currency issue and what Scotland's currency would be post-independence. And this, I think, was the fatal flaw in the Yes campaign, that is to insist that Scotland would use sterling. If this was to be the case, actually, it raises the question of why independence in the first place. I understand why the Scottish Government adopted the strategy it did, the aim being to calm fears of uncertainty and about potential financial disruption. But if I'd been a Yes campaigner, if I'd been sitting there with Blair Jenkins and others, I'd have been arguing that we should argue for a separate currency over which a Scottish state would have had control, set at a rate that would have given Scottish exporters an advantage in global markets. But they didn't do that. But what I think also undermined the Yes case was the evidence that cascaded forth throughout the campaign that seemed to suggest that too little preparatory work had been done on all sorts of issues. Over time, I think, perceptive voters became conscious of Alex Salmond and the Yes campaigners' tendency to assume that, as they said it was so, it was or would be. So that's Yes, in my opinion. Better together. I found better together. 5 minutes, is that all gone? Right, okay. Right. I found Better Together's campaign profoundly. My watch. No, could you send me my watch? Why am I only at 5 minutes? I think I've been cheated here. Okay, personally, I found Better Together's campaign disappointing to the extent that I think no triumphed despite Better Together's efforts rather than because of it. Too often the campaign, it struck me, looked backwards to what the Union had done in the past economically in terms of welfare policy and so on and so forth. And I've heard subsequent to the result, Blair McDougall and others talking about what they focused on and what they thought was important, and they did listen to focus groups, and it was that focus groups were telling them that they're concerned about the currency that had them focus on the negative aspects of their case.